buttons. Yeah, the buttons get.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Terrific, okay. Welcome to the PMI Victoria History Library. My name is Judith Ellis. I'm President of the Library Board, and a very special welcome to our guests. This is our resident guest, but our other two guests this evening. So we have Joanna here and Taryn there. Taryn Ellis, no relation. I thought might have been board members here, but there aren't, so it was just me tonight. Our library is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also to any other elders from communities that might be here with us tonight as well. How many of you actually here for the first time at the library? Anyone? Oh, quite a few. Oh, do come again. We do all sorts of wonderful things. Check our website. We have all sorts of fabulous events, daytime and evening, weekends, walks, bus tours, exhibitions, everything else. So do come again and welcome tonight. We've been here, this library's been in Prahran since 1854, and we're the second oldest public library in Victoria. We have a collection of over 70,000 items in various formats, some of the interesting formats you'll hear about tonight, of course. And we take pride in being the sole library in Australia with such a specialised and extensive collection that's actually available for loan. And our focus is very much local history, and we've got material on most, if not all, towns right throughout the state. So a wealth of information here. A few admin things. If you want bathrooms, they're on the other side of this wall, so you can go back out through that door and do a U-turn, or out through this door and turn left, and they're on the other side there. If there's any sort of emergency, our staff will certainly ensure that you get outside very safely. There are two exits, again one through the door where you came in, and one through this door and turn right. The toilets are not that way, it's the left. And our library staff tonight, Jade here and Lauren, that you met when you first came in. Thanks for helping out tonight. But Jade's taking audio recordings of this evening and possibly photos as well. If anybody doesn't want to be in any sort of photography, make sure you let us know and we can accommodate that. So tonight's panel is all part of Rare Book Week, where there's hundreds of wonderful events on. And this one is from the angle of what's rare in a digital age. And so firstly on my left here we have Ellen Coates, who is the Collections Librarian and Volunteer Coordinator here at the library. And next to her is Joanna McMahon, who's the Assistant Curator in the Collection Acquisition Programs team at the National Film and Sound Archive. And then Taryn on the end is a Digital Preservation Archivist at ACMI, the Australian Centre for the Moving Image. So we've got some wonderful experts here. Really look forward to hearing your views and from quite different perspectives in terms of what's collected. So we're going to have a series of questions, and I haven't asked you, but are you okay if people here engage from time to time when we're talking about some of these issues? So if you want to just stick your hand up or interject as we're talking through some of these important issues, please do. So I'll start with you, Ellen, here. Can digital material actually be rare, given the ability to reproduce and distribute?
Yeah, it absolutely can, and it becomes rare very, very quickly as well. So really, really good example is there were, in the early 2000s, there were a lot of local historical societies that put together really lovely little databases of cemetery registers and all that kind of stuff. A significant portion will not run on modern computers. So and it's almost impossible to get the information out of the database. So the ones that just put them all in PDF or Excel files, no problem at all. The ones that made a database, we have a handful that will only run on, we have an old laptop that turns on and runs Vista and doesn't do anything else, but it'll run the old CD-ROMs. So material can get rare through obsolescence. It can also, digital material can become rare just through it not being collected too. Like, there was a film that came out last year on Pellegrinis. We have a copy of it because I emailed the producer and said, can we have a copy? But it hasn't been picked up by any of the other libraries because there just isn't that easy flow of digital information through to collecting institutes that there is with print information. It's much better with things like ebooks and that kind of stuff, because we've got the National E-Deposit Scheme, which a lot of creators are aware of now. But yeah, through those sort of avenues, and also through the idea that people think it's going to be around forever, so they don't keep an eye on the digital files. So stuff becomes rare, whether it's intended to or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was an interesting last point, thinking about the attitude people have towards digital material. Definitely that idea I was kind of brought up with is once it's online forever. And actually working with digital material, it's pretty alarming how quickly it can become quite rare. So I think the rareness is often in how difficult it can be to find. I'm working specifically for the last couple of years with collecting Australian podcasts, and was the other day looking back at the kind of early years of one of Australia's biggest podcasts, and the first year in 2014 that it came out, I was unable to find it online, and we don't actually even have the kind of tools to find things in terms of in terms of like thinking further about attitudes towards material. The idea that we might want to find something old is actually, and by old I'm talking 2014, is...
Excuse me, I don't think the microphone's turned on.
It's definitely on.
You can't hear anything.
It's on, you just might need to hold it a bit closer.
A bit closer.
You'll need to
Yeah.
speak louder.
Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, if
Yeah.
you get the volume up a bit of...
There might be.
It doesn't turn up on that. Give me 2 seconds, I'll turn it up on the main board.
Thanks.
Sorry, tech issues at the same time as speaking.
I guess adding on to that question.
Okay, try that now.
Is that better?
Yes.
Much better. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you target podcasts? Because any person in the cloud can make a podcast, plus there's some fabulous ones, of course. So how do you target what to collect?
Yeah, so that's another big question. I could go on all night about that one. But yeah, so even finding material from 10 years ago can be quite tricky. And then yes, I think another issue with digital is that we have a lot of material, as you said, something like podcasts. As a medium, in terms of the history of audiovisual media, it's a lot more accessible for anyone to make a podcast. So we've got a bit of a breakdown between citizens and professionals in that way, which makes it in many ways more difficult to decide what to collect. But we also do have frameworks around, we collect things that are popular, things that tell voices that we wouldn't be able to hear in other media. As kind of quickly touched on, like a lot of it is down to what we can get in terms of our collecting process, which is thinking about who's available to contact, who gets back in touch, without the legal deposit structures. It's relationship building, so that really provides a big kind of barrier to a lot of things. And it's also, I think, one of the things that feels a bit scary about online is how much stuff there is. And then when you start to pull it apart, sometimes it feels like there's not quite as much as I thought. Podcast charts stay pretty stable in Australia, and things are coming up and running down, but there are ways to define it.
Well, yeah, definitely digital things can be rare. One of the things that I'm very engaged in at the moment is looking at ACMI's collection of video games. And so we've got video games that go back to the 80s, well, 70s even in some instances now, I come to think of it, and up until now. So what makes some of those rare? They've been published, they're out there in the public domain. As we heard earlier, obsolescence is a big problem. So material goes out on unstable media, floppy disks, for example. We've got games on cassette tape. These are inherently unstable carriers. They're going to degrade, they're going to fall apart. People are going to treat them as disposable because they bought them, they've played them, they're gone now. They don't maintain them under particularly strident conditions. They don't have museum conditions in their houses. But on top of that, we find things like games that have been produced for various platforms. And so, for example, when the Commodore 64 really took off, everyone held on to games from that or wanted games from that. What happens to the ZX Spectrum? Everyone, no one cares about the, I care about the ZX Spectrum. You know, so that was a computing system that fell by the wayside in the light of this new popular, shiny, much more powerful machine. And so versions of games that were produced to run under those more kind of limited RAM environments, much more kind of restricted memory, that kind of stuff, they don't survive in the same ways. Or if they do survive, there are very few of them out there. So while we might have this particular version of The Hobbit for ZX Spectrum for 1982, we might not have version 1.0. Version 1.0 is actually really interesting because it had some amazing bugs in it that actually prevented you from killing the dragon, so you couldn't complete the game, which is, you know, both frustrating and also kind of fascinating in terms of computing history. So that version is quite rare. We don't have a copy of that one. We've got version 1.2, which I still can't complete, I might point out. I tried and I've got 7.5% of the way through before, unfortunately, I am dead. But yeah, so through those kinds of mechanisms, we do lose a lot of material. We also, I think, are at risk of having a little bit of a digital dark age when it comes to collecting personal reminiscences or personal documentation. So for example, back in the day, everyone would be writing things feverishly in their journals or sending letters back and forth between people. And those are on pieces of paper which, under certain conditions, can last centuries. But now it seems we only have access to the deepest inner thoughts or recollections of more famous people. So we'll take in an archive from an author or from a filmmaker, and that might include some more personal reminiscences or familial exchanges or what have you. But for the average person, it's almost like we've taken a step backwards in terms of the insight into their thoughts or daily lives. We have social media, but that's a kind of a performance. So what happens to those more personal memories and the material that we were so excited as archivists to be gaining access to over the last 50 years or 80 years that became popular? So yeah, digital materials can be rare, they're fragile, and we need to take care of them.
Some of that relates to or requires institutions to be conscious enough to actually have oral history programs where they might target politicians, or other luminaries, for example. While we've got you, Taryn, what sort of materials do you collect there? You mentioned a couple there. What other sorts of things do you have?
Oh, we were just chatting about this a little bit before because ACMI has undergone numerous transformations since it was the State Film Centre opened in 1946, and then it acted as a lending library for many, many years. And so the bulk of our collection, our older collection, kind of came in through that process. So we have a lot of film, mostly 8mm and 16mm film, and then that moved into things like video cassettes in every conceivable format. Yes, there are so, anyway. But our most recent collection strategy is available online, so if anyone's interested, they can certainly go and take a look at it. One of the things we're really determined to do is not to replicate the work of other collecting institutions. So for example, we do have dialogue with the NFSA around where each institution's remit lies, and we try to collect in a complementary fashion rather than to replicate the work that they're doing. But the material that's coming in on a more regular basis for us at the moment, we've got time-based media artworks, and that can be quite challenging and quite fun to work with. A lot of those are multimedia as well, so we have both physical and digital components of those. We have commissions that we sometimes will work with external institutions to establish. So, for example, there's artworks that we might commission. Many of those will be AV material, so sound and screen stuff. But we also work with game developers, and so one of the great joys recently has been working with emerging and established developers to produce some micro games. So these are like 5 to 10 minute little playthroughs. We're actually Am I allowed to speak ACMI? We've got some of those being added to our exhibitions in the next 3 to 4 weeks, I think. So they're delightful. You can check out them on the socials.
So do you approach these organisations or individuals to give you material? How do you target? How do you collect them? How do you target?
As has been discussed, it's very much about relationship building.
Yes.
I'm kept in the basement. I'm an archivist. That's what we do. We hang out in basements and we interact a lot with the machines. But we have some very personable individuals who go out and liaise with the creatives, film, sound, as software, art, all of that kind of stuff. And then through that process, but also through public. What is it called when you public commissions, essentially. So we'll make that known to everyone out there. This is what we're looking for. This is the criteria. Submit your application, and through sifting through those, we will select works that we think will have longevity, and we'll use those.
Do you have a collection policy that sits around digital material, or is it different or separate from other sort of collection?
We have a collection strategy,
Yeah.
which describes the sort of material that we're bringing into the collection.
Yes.
How that's brought into the collection would fall more in our digital preservation policies. Yeah.
Are there people that go to gaming conventions and stuff like that to check out the indie games there and, for ACMI?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We have. I think the last conference, what was the last one? I don't know. There was one at the big on at the convention centre, and we had a stall.
Okay.
And that was very fun. I got lots of stuff on our Slack channels at work about people doing outreach there and hanging out with all of the our lovely audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Joanna, the NFSA, what sorts of things do you collect and how do you go about collecting it? You did mention a little bit of that before.
Yeah, we have a really big remit. So I think the speaking collection from the library got transferred over to us, I think about 90 years ago. And then since 2008 is when we got the act that made the Film and Sound Archive a national institution. We collect everything that is moving image and sound. So all the audiovisual material, dating back to really early films right through to contemporary works such as podcasts and social video, which is a new foray and could probably have a whole session on that. But yeah, if we're looking across film, everything, from film to all different types of tape formats to digital cinema packages that we get these days, television, collecting for all 70 years, I think it is this year, of television. In Australia, radio, we do a daily capture of radio stations across Australia. We have a really big collection of published music, and our more newer collecting streams are video games as well, which we've been collecting for quite some time now, but really seriously for the last 5 years, and working on preservation there, as well as podcasts and social video.
Is there an overlap in terms of what each of your institutions collect, and how do you negotiate that?
Yeah, absolutely there is. And as I mentioned before, we do have a lot of knowledge sharing between us. My personal understanding of it, and we're having a quick chat about this before, is the Film and Sound Archive functions a lot like the National Library or the National Archives, where we're getting lots of material and our main goal is around preservation. And I was saying how delighted I was when I moved to Melbourne to go to ACMI and see the spaces absolutely filled with people engaging with those histories and that media. And I feel that kind of, we do have a little exhibition space in Canberra, but that kind of showing the story of the moving image is something ACMI's super strong at.
Yeah, I think there has actually been, of recent times, a greater movement towards dialogue around exactly these questions, because, we all have limited resources. Digital preservation can be both environmentally costly as well as take up a lot of our budgets, right? So we
Storage
need
costs,
to be,
massive.
we need to be cautious about how we do all of that. There's been some experiments in shared collecting as well. So there's been a project that's been set up between the Powerhouse in Sydney, NFSA and ACMI to steward some important games developed here in Australia. And so that's sort of an ongoing process about how we manage a shared collection and what that might look like. But that's, I guess, part of what we're talking about here today is the fact that digital allows us to approach things as a collective rather than each individual institution holding and hoarding their materials.
Yeah, and thinking too about the different focuses of the institutions with the games collecting, with ACMI making available people to come in and play the game and the history of that one. And we've got quite a big digital preservation team now, which is great, so they can be looking at the relationships between the files and how they work together to create a game. And somewhere like the Powerhouse might be really interested in the design elements of a game and what that means to build a game and world build. And so it's kind of a different focus across the national collecting institutions, as well as, making sure that we're, as publicly funded institutions, that we're not doubling up resources, especially with how much material there is to collect. We also don't have the time to be doubling
So
up.
primarily, how do you source your material?
Yeah, so at the Film and Sound Archive, it's mainly through stakeholder relationships. So finding, we might have agreements in place with publishers, broadcasters. We've had a program, for example, around collecting the news, which has been running since 1988, in which every single day we're capturing a news broadcast for preservation. We do also have some agreements in place which make collecting a lot more streamlined, which are with screen funding bodies like, Create New South Wales, Screen Australia, those sort of bodies that give government funding. So if someone's creating a film or a TV series under that, and the video games, which they've done a lot better job at funding those lately, which is great. There will be a copy deposited with the National Film and Sound Archive. And I think in recent years too, we've been slowly building in to different legislation about providing copies to the Film and Sound Archive. For example, we had the digital games tax offset, which was put in place by the Office of the Arts a couple of years ago. And within that, if you're applying for that tax offset, creating a game over, I think it's $500,000, no, might be more than that. Sorry, money is a weird concept in that way, but yes, for games that are kind of outside that indie game remit where they might be getting screen funding for bigger games, they can get a tax offset for producing it in Australia, and within that, it says that they'll need to make a copy available to the Film and Sound Archive. So, working at that base level to get permissions in place, and then on top of that, it's a lot of stakeholder relations. We owe a lot to a lot of collectors, a lot of makers, other people out there who get in touch and help facilitate the collecting.
Helen, history here is more of a traditional library originally, it's quite different background to these two institutions, but of course we have to move into the digital age. So what sort of material now does the library collect that's digital, and how do you source it? Because it's not just e-books.
No,
Yes.
definitely not. We actually don't have a massive ebook collection. When I have a whole bunch to be catalogued that I'm working on at the moment. We work on a slightly different scale. I am the collections department. There is nobody else, so I get to do the outreach and the cataloguing and the digital preservation. So basically, we're a Victorian history library, so we care about content. So what we're trying to do is collect as many voices as possible, so many diverse voices as possible, not quantity. to have as complex a picture of Victoria's history as we can get. And we will do that in whatever format they're being written in or created in. So 15 or 20 years ago, if someone wanted to tell a story about their local railway station or house or something like that, they would have written a book. Now they're making a YouTube channel, or they're just recording a video, or they're doing a podcast, or all that kind of stuff. And we recognise, particularly in Victoria, we do have legal deposit law for video in Victoria, sort of, but it's not something the State Library really actively goes out and gets. So again, it creates a little gap for us to get into. I have talked one YouTube creator into donating all his videos to us, but it's about 150 videos. So you can see one of them on the computer out there. It's a banh mi map of Melbourne. But because he's a trained and statistics person, it's about how much all the banh mi costs, not what they taste like. But yeah, like ACMI and the Film and Sound Archive, we deal in relationships. I spent a lot of time emailing people, saying, hey, I saw your film was out, or I saw it at MIF, Melbourne International Film Festival. I've talked, I think, 4 of the Australian films last year into giving us the file. Our really key thing is we want to own every single digital file that we have. We do not have any subscriptions apart from Ancestry, but that's another whole thing. We treat the files the same way we treat the books, not from a preservation perspective, but from a we want to own it. So that as long as we keep an eye on it, we've been around for 172 years. I think I should know that. We want to know that as long as we keep an eye on the file, we'll still have it in 172 years. That's what we're looking for. And it also means we're completely independent, which means we don't have a lot of funding, but we get a fair bit of flexibility. So collecting digital material is everything from me just emailing people. Like, I do quite well out of Instagram targeting advertising because it's worked out I'll click on anything that's Victorian history. But we're also running like active programs. So when we identify a gap in the collection, so for example, we're trying to be as diverse as we possibly can be, but we're a little bit lacking in ethnic diversity. So I've been running a project since the end of last year where I used the Australian Bureau of Statistics to get a list of every ethnic group in Australia, and I emailed the peak body of every ethnic group in Australia, basically saying, do you have history in any format? We want you to tell the stories in the way that makes sense to you. And a hell of a lot of them just had never been asked. So the Mongolians are writing us a book. I'm interviewing Ugandans like twice a week on Zoom at the moment, so I'm actually running oral history on Zoom. And then transcribing that is going to be another whole thing. We're looking at doing AI, but we're trying to do AI that isn't language learning models, but yeah. Talk to Jade about that one. It's a process. But yeah, things like that. And we're doing some oral history Romanians. I've been out to the Lithuanian Library and the Moreland Turkish Association, finding me a bunch of stuff. It's about being flexible, and it's about building these relationships and just being interested. So it's about talking to people about their stories in whatever format that comes in. I've talked, I think, 4 or 5 podcasters into giving me the AV files. So like the actual files from the podcast. One of them was really excited about it because she was getting sick of paying the domain fee for hosting it, and it's all on Victorian women. So won the Victorian Community History Award. It's probably not going to be there in 18 months, and we've got all the files. So yeah, it's about building those relationships, talking to these people, and just trying. A lot of people don't get back to me, but I'm fairly persistent as well. Like, I have a note in my diary of email all the people from MIF who said they'd give me their films and haven't done it yet. So that's my job for tomorrow. I will keep going until they say actually no. We're also lucky that we fell into a slight gap. So because we're not big enough to have subscriptions or to be relying, we do have a library management system, but we don't have one of the really, really big ones. We're on Koha for any library nerds. It means that we have an on-site server. So all our digital material, I keep saying physical digital files, and it doesn't make sense, but the actual digital files themselves are stored on a server that is actually in this building. Until about 3 months ago, I was physically swapping hard drives and taking them home. But we managed to get grant funding, so we now actually have an offsite hard drive that we own in a server farm in Port Melbourne.
So I got to go to a server farm, which was quite interesting. But the really cool thing about that is we own the hardware that it's on here. We own the hardware that it's on in the server farm. We can get at your files because, I mean, we could technically get hacked, but apart from that, from a copyright perspective, we can say the file is safe. Like Stan agreed to let us have one of their films, which I was very surprised they said yes, but the producer of the film asked them and they did, for that reason, basically. And we had to sign an agreement saying we will keep it protected. And yeah, so it backs up to our nice server in the server farm in Port Melbourne, and it means that we can have these files, and this is not just new material, it's also material we've digitised from audio tape to CD to just to the digital file. You can see some of it out there. So yeah, it's about relationships, it's about making sure we have these connections, and about making sure that we're always asking for people's stories.
Do you do much digitisation of physical hard copy?
Yes and no. So within copyright law in Australia, if you're a library, you can digitise anything for preservation reasons. This doesn't mean we can digitise the books, because there is no argument that the books are in any danger of disintegrating, sadly. But it does mean we can digitise our DVD collection. So I've ripped our entire DVD collection. I also do very well from DVDs in op shops. So I went to buy a table and left with, I think, 19 Australian movies and documentaries for like $25. One of my favourite ones is one of the ones I've got out there. I was at the Lifeline Port Fairy op shop, found a DVD from 2007 where they'd interviewed all the people in the local aged care home. So this feels aged, so older Australians is a gap, regional is a gap, and any kind of like very local biography is also a gap. And we're able to digitise that and make it accessible. We're also very, very lucky that we have the Cinema and Theatre Historical Society in this building, so they are based down the end of the corridor. And Mike very, very kindly digitises some of our VHS. So I've got a high priorities, all the high priority stuff is done, and we're slowly working our way through the lower priority material. I just give him 5 VHSs at a time and he digitises them for us. We also did have a really big digitisation project that we got crowdfunding for. So there was a book written in the early 2000s about the community gardens of the inner city high-rises. And as part of that, they interviewed about 65 people in these community gardens, and the interviews are all on microtape. So we do not have the facilities to digitise microtape, so we managed to raise some crowdfunding money and got them digitised. They're also, and this is another one where we've kept the originals, so you can see the originals out there, partly because new technology might happen that will mean that we can digitise it into a better format, but also because I'm an historian by training. These microtapes are kept in envelopes with the handwritten notes of the date and the interviewer, and I'm going to annoy, my mother is up the back. This is her book, and she transcribed all of the interviews, and it's all her handwriting on it. So it's all that, like, she went through and numbered all of them for me, and then went through and numbered all the photos of the slides she digitised. So I'm biased, but it's a really interesting collection. But it's all transcribed on our catalogue as well. So we put a lot of extra information on our catalogue. So if I can dump an entire blurb and contents note into the catalogue when I'm doing a book, that's what we'll do. We want stuff to be as discoverable as possible.
Few of you mentioned digital obsolescence, and it's obviously a huge issue. So how do you ensure, or what are the greatest threats, I guess, to digital collections going into the future? You mentioned backup.
Backup, but yeah, it's anything. Again, I think I said this at the start, but it's anything that's in a database. You want the files unconnected to other things, because it's the connection that stops working, not the files themselves usually.
Well, databases become redundant.
Yeah, exactly.
So quickly.
Yeah, definitely. Anything that's digital is actually on a physical thing. A drive is, a spinning mechanical thing, wears down with time. Even if it's on the cloud, it's actually on just someone else's physical thing out there. So digital material faces a lot of obsolescence in technology, in making sure you're continually transferring things. One of the really interesting things I found with podcasting, and it actually just came up briefly before when you said that they didn't want to pay for the domain name, with podcasting and social video, other products online, a lot of it is hosted on proprietary platforms who don't have archiving as part of what they're interested in doing or the product that they're selling, as well as those platforms being at financial whims. If Amazon goes under tomorrow, I hope they're not listening. What happens to everything that we've got backed up there? So, and we find that increasingly with podcasts, as they become a bit more platform oriented rather than on open feeds, platforms will get rid of any ability to download, to even get your own work out. If you stop paying your subscription that you're using to host your platform on a certain aggregator, it depends who you're hosted with, their T's and C's. You might lose your podcasts, right away. It might be in a month's time. They might give you a 90-day buffer to go and download your own material. So I think that that's also a massive risk and part of what you're saying of having your own material in terms of on your own servers, your own backups and control over those, and in separate locations is a very good preservation strategy to start to think about having control over the material into the future.
So the threats to the data and the software that's written in or database that sits in the device that it's in or on, and the viability of a company that might be storing it for you or not storing it for you. So it's at different levels. So, and again, Taryn too, how do you manage the risks around that? Do you have risk management strategies around those different elements? Because the methods of dealing with them would be quite different for those different levels.
Yeah, certainly, and I think that's a really interesting point actually, because I hadn't thought about it as a sort of like a tiered system in that way. I mean, all digital preservation is basically risk management. Like that's that's the heart of what we're doing, really. In terms of managing some of those risks, absolutely, we've been doing some things we've been doing for a really long time. We know how to move one file from one hard drive to another hard drive and ensure that that file is exactly the same as the original or as the one that we've either copied or moved. We can do that. That's not a problem. We are getting better at some of the obsolescence issues. I mean, when I say getting better, we're becoming more aware of those. So now many institutions are hoarding equipment, essentially, playback equipment. It looks like, I don't know, my grandfather really liked gadgets and he had a garage, and the garage technically fit his car in, but only because there was a tennis ball dangling from a string, and that once that hit the windscreen, he would stop and get out. Some of our storage rooms are beginning to look like that because we need all of the playback devices and we need substitutes. So when those playback devices fail, that we can Frankenstein a new playback device. We've got 3D printers that we can use to print hopefully missing components when it comes down to that. But we also are beginning to recognise more and more now that, of course, all of the material that we're looking after are just zeros and ones. And zeros and ones don't exist outside of that ecosystem. So problematically, what we need to do then is to be able to recreate that entire ecosystem. So that's not just the hardware for the computers, that's not just the peripherals like the joysticks or the mice or the particular keyboard or what have you that people might need. That's also the software. And that is the kicker, because here we are desperately trying to preserve these beautiful, rare digital objects that are software. And then we've got a shadow collection, which is all the software you need to facilitate that. So, I mean, even minuscule things that you don't even think about, like a driver. You know, I need a driver for this particular graphics card or, you know, whatever.
Flash player.
All of this
We
sort
have
of
an
stuff.
ongoing argument with Flash player.
Yes, all of this. And so that becomes kind of a process in and of itself. And, you know, we start thinking, okay, well, we've got workarounds for that. We've got emulation. But an emulator is software. and an emulator has these particular functions and works in this particular operating system on this particular computer. And so then what, you know, is it emulators all the way down? Is that what we're doing? Right? So yeah, it's a really interesting problem.
So you've got migration strategies where you're moving your data from one platform to another or one device to another. Do you also have, as part of the risk management, conversion strategies where you're converting to new or different file formats?
Absolutely, and migration is one of those tools that we have in our toolbox. But migration is not necessarily a seamless process either. I mean, in some ways we go, okay, look, well, I can take my MPEG-2 file that used to serve me so well, but is now no longer supported by the internet, and I can convert that to today's hot thing, which is, you know, here we've got a nice MP4 over here, and I can feel reasonably confident about that. What do I do with my Flash animation? Right? What do we do with something that's kind of essentially code? You know, do you rewrite it from scratch? I mean, do I get AI to rewrite it? So one of the things that we do when we're collecting, especially new and commissioned works, is we sit down with the creators of those works and we do what we can call a preservation interview. So we talk to them about what are the most important components of your work? What are the qualities that really define this for you? Is it this particular shade of yellow? Is it the fact that when you tap this, stars come out at this speed? You know, like, how do we define what is the heart of this thing, and how do we make sure that that continues on through the next iterations of that?
And if you're rewriting it, you have effectively created a new record.
Potentially, yes. These are the conundra that we face. It's a philosophical problem.
Yes.
Yeah, I think as you're saying, like migration being one strategy, I once read somewhere, maybe it's very known archival knowledge, that nothing has ever been preserved, it's only being preserved, which I've always continually think about, is that we're enacting strategies on it, be physical or digital material, that increases the likelihood of, like, down the line being able to access something and make meaning out of it. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about as well when we're talking about digitizing physical analog material as well, that is a strategy for increasing access to something, as well as our ability to access something down the line. But it's one strategy amongst many that we're constantly enacting on things in the hope of increasing the likelihood. Yeah.
Did you want to add anything to that, Ellen?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, we're basically just trying to do the best we can to make sure that as much of the information in these files is going to be accessible for as long as we can manage to make it. It's pretty much the essence. And we do have a digital material strategy which works with our collection policy, so we've got a very detailed collection policy. The new version, which will hopefully be finalised by the end of the year, has a lot more on formats. So the previous version was 2023 and it had some material on formats, but this isn't just digital, we have a whole bunch of formats. We collect zines and ephemera and books and all sorts of things. The new collection policy has really doubled down on what formats we collect, why we collect them, and where some of our gaps are. I'd really like to get into games. I just haven't worked out how yet. And because they'd have to be specifically about Victoria as well, which again limits the options. But yeah, I think every collecting institution is just doing the best they can with the resources that they've got.
I guess at a high level, what do you think the role is and will be in the future, but certainly now as well, of collecting institutions such as yourselves in the age of the internet, specifically the internet, and then when you think about the looming effect of AI?
I actually think we're going to become more important.
Yeah.
Even Google search is getting worse. We've started getting ChatGPT queries where we've had one that was just, I worked out what he wanted eventually, but ChatGPT had just made something up. So I think collecting institutions, because we have some controls over the quality of the information, I think we're going to become even a more important source as you begin to not be able to trust the internet, because there's more and more internet articles that are being written by AI, I know there are people that are now refusing to read anything that was published after about 2024 because they can't guarantee it's not AI. And it's the same with the books. So I mean, I can't guarantee the facts in every single book are correct, but people actually researched it. They didn't just chuck it in AI. So I think they're going to actually become more important as a source of trusted information.
Yeah, I completely agree. Being trusted, publicly owned and available, I think, is also really important. I also think, Jude touched on earlier, the internet as online spaces are often, the aim of them is for, quick communication, content creation, publishing. Like, it's not for preservation, so relying on things to be preserved from the internet just as an ecosystem, is a bit of a fallacy that we can rely on it to preserve things, I think, which is why we end up with rare digital material, and whereas collecting institutions are working in order to collect and preserve. So that's the main basis
The
of.
challenge is to collect things that are trusted, as you
Yeah.
say, a book that someone's researched, but in an internet-based environment it's quite different. So you have to know what you can and can't trust.
Yeah, there's also something really interesting in non-trustworthy things, or I think they also form part of the picture. Often when people say, why do you collect podcasts? I mean, this isn't a very great example in terms of not one I listen to, but I'm like, I don't think you could explain to someone what is happening in world politics at the moment if you don't have Joe Rogan to listen back to. Regardless of the validity of a source, I think we do have a lot to do as a collecting institution with, thinking about truthful information and media literacy and things like that, but also thinking about, regardless of the truth of a source, it is also the information of our time, and that is important evidence of what people are consuming, what ideas are going around, and how that's shaping our world. So,
It's reflective of the culture, isn't it?
Could I just
Absolutely.
add quickly? Sorry.
Just very quickly on the non-trustworthy information, we've got some of it as well. So we've got a couple of COVID anti-vax books. We've got particularly some products of the history wars from the 90s that were very, very inaccurate about First Nations history. As a cataloguer, it's about making it clear that this isn't an accurate representation of the time, it's an accurate representation of this perspective. That's the really key difference for us. And again, small institution, we don't have a lot of government oversight, so I can get away with saying Keith Windshuttle is fiction on our catalogue.
Oh, sorry, I got so interested in what you were saying, I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. I think institutions do continue to be relevant and important even in the age of the internet. And I think that the internet is also really important.
Yeah.
I look at stuff like the incredible work by the Internet Archive and the Wayback Machine, which is just amazing, like what a resource, right?
Yes.
It's incredible. But having said that, it exists because one person has a lot of monies and wanted to embark upon this incredible project which is going to benefit all of us. But that's one person.
Yes.
So how do we ensure the continuity of that collection? How do we keep that going? There's a little bit more stability, I think, in some of our institutions, and we can get all political about who's going to fund what and how long that funding is going to last and if it's adequate. But there is some kind of continuity. There's a recognition in the community that this is a collection that belongs to the people and will be preserved for future generations. Having said that, institutions like our own don't have the best reputation, and rightly so, going way back, because the voices that we collect and privilege is a way of defining history. And so we do need to be so much more cautious, as has been demonstrated tonight. I'm hoping that, this is the way of the future, but we can't just pat ourselves on the back and say we are a source of truth, we are going to hold things for the people. If we don't engage with people, if we don't see what our communities want us to collect, and if we don't reflect those communities back to themselves, then, you know, bring on the internet.
We need both, I think, because the internet is definitely democratising, and it does mean that information can be fairly accessible. But you also need the collecting institutions to tell these stories in a curated way. I think one of the really key things, it's a library thing, so I don't know if it's made it to the Film and Sound Archives and ACMI or not, is libraries are never neutral. So it's not about collecting absolutely every perspective, it's about trying to find, you don't want to privilege some sources in a way that means that the actual story is getting lost, basically.
You mentioned part of legal deposit before, Ellen. How does that apply in the digital world, if at all?
Problematically, we don't have a national legal deposit law for video. We should. Most of the states now have it. It's somewhat actively used in Victoria. What we do really, really well is the National e-deposit scheme, but you can't put video material into it. So it's really great for PDFs and all sorts of other electronic documents, but it doesn't do video. I'm really hoping they will at some point because it's a fantastic platform that works through all the national and state libraries. But I think the ACT is almost the only state or territory that doesn't have legal deposit for video. And according to NASLA, which is acronyms, it's basically the coalition of all the national and state libraries. They're probably not going to get video internet until every state and territory has legal deposit law for video, and also there's a real problem with it because the legal deposit law goes to the libraries, not to these amazing institutions that are actually really set up for collecting it. We'd love to have legal deposit, but we're way too little.
Yeah, just reflecting what you said there, we don't have legal deposit for audiovisual material in Australia. So published material go through the National Library's legal deposit scheme. But yeah, it's about working it in with relationships and into future legislation, as well as different things I was talking about before with the screen funding bodies and places like that, which mean that we're able to get copies of material. But yes, no legal deposit for AV work, so we're fully reliant on relationship building to collect.
Is there any channel or channels through which you can lobby for this sort of thing? I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer to some extent, but...
Yeah, absolutely. I think different countries do it differently as well. Obviously, I think one of the fears with legal deposit is maybe we'll end up with a massive influx of where do we put the balance of that, especially in a digital age with how much material is coming in, and opt-in legal deposit works for a lot of different places where it's basically we can, like a collecting institution can approach and get material without having to collect everything. That is the way, but yeah, I feel like I'm not in our governance team at work, so not entirely sure on that, but if anyone's ever dealt with law, like copyright law, other laws in Australia, really, like, law's slow to change and to catch up. And especially when you're dealing with something, like if we're talking in the digital and online context, which is a bit wild west of ownership and copyright and making copies and distributing, a lot of what we know has been thrown out the window. So yeah, I think that's an interesting space.
Did you want to comment on that, Tash?
I'm just really grateful that I don't have to deal with legal deposit for video. I know it would be a really good thing, but I'm thinking about the file sizes involved in that, and that is a lot.
Yeah.
That is just a lot.
Taryn, what's your favourite digital item in your collection?
Oh, my favourite digital item in ACMI's collection, or just in general?
In ACMI's collection.
Oh, I got extremely fond.
Sorry, what's your favourite rare digital item?
Oh.
Sounds right, rare. Sorry.
I was going to start talking about our mod of Quake Team Fortress, which I had a lot of fun setting up recently for our exhibition. We had a LAN party with that. But I don't know that that would actually be described as rare, since I believe you can get it through like Steam. We do have some really beautiful old games. So I'm going to go back to the games. I'm going to go with Gumboots Australia. Gumboots Australia was released, I think, in 1992, and it's very similar to Where in the World Has Come in San Diego, if anyone remembers that series. But it's set in Australia, and the goal of the game is to use your limited budget to travel around, take odd jobs and find clues and track down, solve mysteries essentially. But it's a geography lesson as well, and it's very, very funny. And ACMI happens to have quite a rare copy of this game. It was originally released with CGA graphics, so for those of you who aren't aware, that's like 4 colours essentially. We've got cyan, magenta, white and black. And it's cool and it looks really pretty, and most of the ones that you can play for free online are that version. But we actually have the VGA version where you can see 256 colours on screen at once, people. So that is very exciting. It's a lovely game.
And outside your collection, do you have another favourite digital item?
I was fortunate enough to work on some artworks by the very famous public artist Stanislaw Stojakovsky, and they were all saved on floppy disk, these pixel-based artworks from the late 80s and early 90s, and I was part of the project that liberated them from the prisons of their disks, released them back into the world. But they were, of course, in image format that is no longer supported. They were developed for RISC-OS software, and so we had to find a way to migrate all of those to a contemporary format so that we could actually see them. And when you manage to get something to, I don't know, I felt like an archaeologist, because I was looking at an image on my screen that no one had seen for like 40 years and had actually never been shown or displayed anywhere. This was his personal kind of collection. That was a thrill.
Wonderful, wonderful. Joanna, in your collection, what's your favourite rare digital item?
Yeah, I've got to go with some floppy disk things as well, because they're always fun to get. I was previously working for a brief time in our games team, and Chris Ania, who heads up our games team, is very, very, very good at sleuthing, and actually found a Neighbours game that was unreleased. It was made by I think he was a meteorologist in the UK in the 90s for Amiga, a point and click game that he made because his sister loved Neighbours and he made it as a birthday present. And it is using digitised VHS tapes and made this really cool game that's full of British Australian slang, like slightly right, slightly wrong. And yeah, Chris tracked that one down across the world. It was obviously not released as it is a copyright nightmare, but was, you know, shared amongst people in floppy disks. So yeah, I love, as probably most archivists do, and especially people working in collecting, the kind of like hunt for things is always fun. I've definitely been on, as we were talking about before, the pestering. I've been on LinkedIn before and been like, I heard you had a podcast in 2004. Do you still have a copy? And then often I'm met with no, and then maybe a few months later, I've had a couple where someone said, hey, I've been at my mum's house this weekend and found a hard drive, or I found a copy in an old email. And I think, yeah, that's from the collecting perspective, always such a joy with people finding and rediscovering material. Yeah.
Ellen, in our collection, what's your favourite rare digital item?
We have lots of interesting stuff, but I think one of mine comes down to some of the stories about how we get it. This one's actually out there. We have a film called The Dawn of Trugo. So Trugo, for anyone that doesn't know, is a uniquely Melbourne sport that was invented in the Newport rail yards. It basically involves hitting a rubber disc with a large mallet through your legs at some goals. That's the same length as a rail carriage. There's about 8 clubs that are still operating, and I was at one of the clubs for a social thing with a library group I'm part of, and I was chatting to the 90-year-old president of the club, and he goes, I've got this movie that was made in the 90s about Trugo, it's semi-fictional, and then he insisted on driving back to his house, putting on a USB stick and bringing it back and giving it to me. So we have the USB stick, which we loan in a very high-tech envelope. We also have it backed up on our server, obviously, so if anything happened to the USB stick, that wouldn't be the end of the world. But yeah, just for the story, and it's just so specifically Melbourne. I also have a favourite outside our collection object, mainly because it's my favourite story of digital obsolescence. I've never worked with this, it would have been amazing. But so the Doomsday Book that was written in 1086, for that 800 book, so they went around and recorded audio files and video and interviews and all sorts of stuff. They did it on Laserdisc and on an operating system that they built. The 1086 Doomsday Book is more accessible. So if you can read the Latin and the paleography, the Doomsday Book is on vellum, which as long as you don't get it wet, will still happily be there in 800 years. So yeah, if you can go and see the Doomsday Book at the National Archives in the UK, and yeah, if you look at it, you can read it. There's no way in hell you're getting it the 1980s version.
Questions, comments from anybody here? Yes, please.
I had a question about the role of piracy in collecting, both in terms of that the sort of podcast example you gave of what happens when the website itself goes down and the owner doesn't have a copy. Maybe someone's got an MP4 they shouldn't have. How does that work? But also, when it comes to someone filming a movie from a camera in their pocket, at what point does that become personal history documenting the cinema experience and not just the film?
I think the only time we've got close to this is ripping DVDs. If a DVD is really scratched, I have had suggestions that I could possibly find a way to find that pirated episode and download it. I haven't done it yet, but if someone comes up with a particular episode of Lane Woodley's Melbourne TV series that is so scratched it will not play, please let me know. But yeah, that's pretty much the only time we get into it. We have got a couple of videos where people have given me the DVDs. I've copied the DVD and then given the DVD back, but which is technically a little bit iffy, but is not really in that space.
Yeah, this is such an exciting question because I think one of the big puzzle pieces with archiving is people who are archiving as hobbyists or as fans of material. We have so many instances in where, like a radio show we have no copies of broadcasts, but then there's been someone who's sitting there taping every broadcast, and decades later they donate it to the Film and Sound Archive. We own less than 10% of the copyright of the collection, so a lot of it is outside of our copyright. And yeah, I think as a national collecting institution, we have to play extremely closely to copyright laws, but it's really exciting when people are able to collect and work outside of that. And I think that's like the flexibility of hobbyist archives, or anyone who really enjoys media. It's pretty amazing the sorts of things that they've done. And there's so many instances, especially with podcasts, where even the podcaster themselves doesn't have their own material. There was, I think it was like 2014, Adam Curry, who's sometimes called like the Podfather, because he had this podcast called The Daily Source Code. It was one of the first podcasts, and it had just wrapped up a couple of years before, and he said, does anyone out there, this is on Twitter, have like a full archive of the MP3s, because I don't have it. And luckily there were people out there who have been downloading them, who have been keeping material, and I think that happens across analog material, digital material, and it's pretty amazing. I know with a lot of games preservation, a lot of that has been pioneered by people who were really wanting to play their favourite old game and would rip or pirate it. Yeah.
I've got some fun stories about that actually. So people there's some problems with the pirating. Obviously, it's wonderful if it's the only version of this really important thing that we have, no matter the quality, no matter the format, we're going to take it, right? But that can come up against some institutions' collection policies, so oftentimes they'll be like, okay, so this is what we're after. This is the formats that we want. These are the formats that we know how to maintain. If it's not in that format, we probably won't take it. So there's some of that going on. But it also does wonderful things, and without those hobbyists, I don't know that we'd be able to rip our DVDs to the standard that we can, or to preserve our floppy disks. And some of my favourite things that we have in ACMI's kind of research collection that came in through a whole project was some cracked floppy disk games where the crackers would you open them up in a hex editor and the crackers actually signed it within the zeros and ones of the files. So they call themselves quite rude things sometimes, which is always very entertaining. But what that also does is introduce a little bit of doubt about the integrity, I guess, of the game, because one of the things that early crackers did also used to do was to fix bugs or to make it so that their name was permanently at the very, very top of the high score chart and that kind of stuff. So it is, in some ways, a different version of the object that we're trying to collect, but it's also a massive part of the history of that culture. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. Thank you.
Could I just add something quickly?
This isn't new. We have a hell of a lot of books that somebody photocopied at some point and then donated the photocopy. So we have no idea where the original is. It might no longer exist. It might have been a pamphlet that was put out once in the 70s and somebody decided to photocopy it. We also have books that people have made notes on, and those notes become part of the story of the book. So it's kind of the same thing. It just keeps changing. Same story, different format.
You mentioned about copyright. What about the situation with plagiarism?
Do you mean plagiarism of resources we hold, or?
Oh, well, out of all this research, and as you know, I'm a rail historian, and I've bought many books on the same subject, and the amount of plagiarism, it's shocking, I can tell you.
Yeah, I mean, from a book perspective, there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
There's been a really interesting copyright change, actually it was released on the 1st of April, called the Orphan Work Copyright Law. So we've had a lot of, all libraries this isn't technically a digital materials point, but it will probably start applying to digital materials too. If you've got an item where you cannot find the copyright, you can now officially declare it as an orphan work, and you can then use it. So it happens a lot with some of our older books. So someone will come in and say, there's this photo of my family's house from the 1960s. The book was written in 1965. The author's name is Jack Smith. There is no address, no phone number, no way of finding out who might legally hold the copyright. The photo is not referenced. That would be an orphan work. So that means it's not plagiarism. So we do want people to be able to use the information. As an historian, use it properly and reference it. And then you can get away with a lot more. Copyright law in Australia is 10% for actually copying material. We don't specifically tell them, you can't force people to not plagiarise, basically. We loan our material. So it's the same with our digital material. If someone, you can download and borrow our digital material, some of it, if you're a member. And it's the same with the book. I can't stop somebody taking a book home and photocopying all of it. I can tell them not to, but I can't make them not do it. It's the same with digital material.
Yeah, we have pretty controlled access. People need to put in an access request, and then they can come in and view material on site. It's part of the reason I'm in Melbourne, even though our main institution is in Canberra, because we have an on-site office where documentary makers, podcasters, researchers come by and view things. So that definitely helps. And then any commercial or reuse requests will always go back through a copyright holder. But yeah, it is especially if we're talking about digital, I think there's a lot that, as I said, in terms of the internet being like a wild west and hard and fast, I think more often than not, I would probably be approaching podcasters who maybe like, or I'm just thinking about people who post things online primarily, who would have less knowledge than actually the copyright they're entitled to, like less, you know, they would think that they own less than they do rather than more than they do, and try to lock it down, because I think it's inherent in sharing something online. You're aware that it's going to be out there, and you've kind of lost a bit of control over who might then use it and take it and remix it or replay it. So yeah, it's quite an uncontrolled area in terms of plagiarism.
Did you want to add anything, Taryn, or not?
No, I think you guys have covered it really well. Thank you.
It's probably time to wrap up. So are you able to hang around for a little while if people want to chat to you?
Yeah, and if anyone's got any questions about the stuff we have out there, I can answer that too.
Yes, because we've got a bit of a display out there that Ellen's put together for us. Thank you very much, Alan and Joanna and Taryn as well. A small gift I'll give to you in a minute. Thank you all very much for coming. If you like what you've seen tonight, as I said, we have lots of events. So leave your name at the door or go on our website, join. Thank you very much for coming. There's still tea and coffee and biscuits down there if you want to have something before you go. And thanks everybody.